woman emailed me today and wanted to write a novel about things that she said she wanted to include something about any other time I go down and take a few photos.
And they told your math was low enough. I didn't think yes, and I'm part of that. That's my brother.
So are you putting this on Zoom?
No, it's on YouTube.
On YouTube?
Yep.
Okay.
You're right, you're going faster and faster. Okay, I'll get my chair. Hey, I was kind of on my way toward you. I guess it is. Is it next Thursday? A week from this Thursday. That's a challenge.
So they're doing theirs on YouTube.
Okay. Oh, okay. Would you be the one that probably did the tour?
Yeah.
Grace is the one that did the tour.
Grace, I'm Paul Jula.
Oh, hi. Hi, Grace.
Bill Sherman is coming down from Des Moines.
Yeah.
He's a man that's done a lot of work with
Okay.
get together in March, a year later, from our COVID season. It's delightful to be with us in person, and also thank you very much for the work and the time and the effort that it takes for us to also connect virtually with our friends and students and constituents across the county. My name is Elizabeth Garles. I am chairman of the Friends of the Harlan-Lincoln House, and it's just very exciting to get back together in the context of our annual March series, where we learn more about connections with the Harlan-Lincoln House, Iowa Wesleyan University, and our area. So, welcome. I just want to almost say, hip hip hooray!
Hip, hip, hooray.
Good. Thank you for joining us today. Indeed, we are very pleased to be back together and in a new space. So we will appreciate some of your comments, perhaps what you think about coming from our usual spot in Chadwick Library over here to a place where we can spread out a little more, obviously, in the social hall, but it has other advantages as well. So if you have any insight or whatever you might think about this location for the future when we aren't in the COVID restrictions, well, I will appreciate hearing that as well. Indeed, when we have made these introductions in the past, maybe we haven't been so used to those caveats of turning off or silencing or muting our phone. But maybe I'll just say that one more time. Maybe we're a lot more inclined and know to do that in perfect, thank you, in today's world. I'm always impressed with that commercial that we see now that says we're becoming our parents, and definitely I am, but asking just to turn off our phones is always a good practice, I think. So today we are very excited and pleased to begin our March series with the director of the Harlan-Lincoln House. I know that we might think that terms like repurposing or multi-use are kind of trendy terms for buildings, but not the case. And she is going to share some insight on some use for the Harlan-Lincoln House that perhaps you hadn't known very much about. In fact, it is titled Artist in This Residence. So we're looking forward to hearing Anna Villareal tell us today more about one of the multi-purpose uses of the Harlan-Lincoln House for about 13 years. And maybe some of us can even think back and remember a little bit about that as well. Anna, of course, is a usual presenter for us because she has such a wealth of knowledge and understanding about the topics she investigates. She is, of course, I will read her credentials in some degree, but as our museum director, she has Historical Administration Masters from Eastern Illinois University and from Iowa State University. She has a History BA and an Anthropology degree as well. She certainly has had several museum experiences in other locations across the Midwest, and therefore, as I say, is so well qualified to present on her topic today, Art in This Residence. We look forward to it, Anna.
Good morning. Or afternoon. Afternoon. Thank you, Liz, and it's so wonderful. I will repeat, it's so wonderful to see everyone here. Thank you to those who are here in person, and thank you to those who are joining us virtually. I will let you know this is a pretty photographic-heavy presentation, and so I'll actually be turning the PowerPoint today into a PDF, and I'll be emailing it out to all of you, both virtual and in person, so you can take some more time with the photographs if you so choose. I don't want to rush history for anyone. It's one of my favorite topics, as you know. So I'll start with a question. How long does a tour take? This is hands down, the most common question asked when patrons call to schedule a visit at the Harlan-Lincoln House. Over the last 3.5 years, I have scientifically honed my response. We can accommodate a museum tour between 15 minutes and 2 hours, depending on your availability. While humorous, this truly is an honest response. Myself and our fantastic docents, as you will see, wonderful picture, have 148 years of knowledge regarding the museum history to share with visitors, from the residency of Senator James Harlan and his family in the home, to Senator Harlan's daughter, Mary Harlan-Lincoln, and her donation of the home to the university in 1907, even further to the museum's founding as the museum in 1959. So whether a 15-minute tour or a 2-hour tour, which people do take me up on, the history does tend to focus in that first phase, the residency of Senator James Harlan, our 4th Iowa Wesleyan president, and his family in the home between 1873 and 1899. While the primary focus of our tours and the artifact collection at the Harlan-Lincoln House do speak to Senator Harlan and his descendants, I slowly began to realize that more than 50 years of history, kind of the post-Harlan history if we want to call it, was being boiled down to just one sentence on my tours. So imagine yourself a visitor to the Harlan-Lincoln House, walking from the first floor parlor to the second floor gallery, and I might say something like, taking a deep breath, after donation of the house to Iowa Wesleyan University in 1907, the building functioned as a residence for Iowa Wesleyan presidents, a tea room, a meeting space for Greek campus organizations, and the art department before being established as a museum in 1959. Whew, deep breath done. I saw that it was critical for us to understand more of this 1907 to 1959 time period, not only to make sure that we were ensuring the preservation of the entire history of the building, but also because more recent past tends to connect with current students, alumni, community members, and friends for whom the more recent past is more engaging. Ironically, these discussions about kind of developing the museum narrative were occurring at the same time I came across a picture of interest in the Newsom archives on campus. If you've been here for any of my previous brown bags, you know how my research can be derailed by just one photographic print of interest. So this is a black and white image from the early 1950s depicting Iowa Wesleyan art students at work on the lawn of the Harlan-Lincoln House. It quickly became my goal and our quest today to learn more about the campus in the 1950s and the Harlan home as the epicenter of creativity and artistic expression at Iowa Wesleyan. Here's a wonderful close-up. You can see the students sitting at individual drafting tables, as well as my favorite, this young man here in the foreground, I'm sure dutifully sketching the home's architecture from that southeast corner perspective along Broad Street. So, our first task is to pinpoint the specific dates of residency of the art department at the Harlan-Lincoln House. Now, thankfully, you have all seen the promotional materials for our brown bag lecture today and know that we were able to confirm that 1946 to 1959 date range. But how did we reach that point? I first turned, as typical, to the history and alumni directories from Iowa Wesleyan. The directory, published in 1967, reads, although art courses had been available at the college since the mid-19th century, and a diploma was given from time to time, the Department of Art with a major was established in 1946. Perfect. We then take this knowledge and start looking at the course catalogs for 1945 to 1950. The 1947 Iowa Wesleyan course catalog listed 16 academic departments, including art, which had not previously been listed in the catalog. And finally, our favorite, the Croker Yearbook. The Croker Yearbook of 1947 went further, reading the art department expanded greatly this year with Mr. Carl Fraccassini, a nationally recognized artist, as its instructor. And an inspiring setting was afforded the art students by the location of their department in the historic Harlan home. So success. Confirmation of the 1946 establishment of the modern art department at Iowa Wesleyan, its location as the Harlan-Lincoln House, and the appointment of its head, faculty professor Carl Fraccassini. With this information, I want to take one quick step back and look at Iowa Wesleyan College, as it was called then, during the 1940s and the establishment of the art department. We begin at the top. The Reverend Dr. Stanley Barnum Niles assumed the presidency of the institution in 1938. He was a graduate of Albion College in Michigan, and then attended the Garrett Theological Seminary, a Methodist-based seminary, at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. Reverend Niles was serving as a district superintendent for the Methodist Episcopal Church in Big Rapids, Michigan, before accepting the presidency at Iowa Wesleyan. Niles' tenure is really fraught with, for a lack of better terms, conflict. That is due to his residency as president during World War II. But, thankfully, Iowa Wesleyan rebounded. So, during his tenure, in 1947, the student population sat at under 400 students. Within 3 years, the student population actually expanded above 800 students, primarily because of the GI Bill. Over 300 of those students were World War II veterans. So he saw both the decline due to the global conflict and the rise above after the global conflict. As students continued to enroll in Wesleyan, they had to handle and hire more faculty and staff to deal with the surge. 56 part-time and full-time staff were added to the staff and faculty, including Carl Fraccassini for the art department. I really like President Niles' quote here. Wesleyan is day by day growing older, larger, stronger, and I sincerely hope wiser. I am confident that her program in almost every department is the richest it has ever been. I am equally confident we're yet a long ways away from our ultimate possibilities. As previously stated, Professor S. Carl Fraccassini was appointed leadership of the Iowa Wesleyan Art Department upon its formation in 1946. I do have to say, in terms of a campus with long-standing publications, Professor Fraccassini seemed to hide from the camera quite frequently, never kind of showing up in department or division faculty and staff photos, and really only kind of popping his head in when it was related to the art department, which I think is quite nice. So this is the portrait that was in the art department section of the Croker Yearbook in 1949, a very young Fraccassini. We actually learn a lot about his early life through his obituary. Fraccassini grew up in Colorado. He took a break from his high school education to be a coal miner before graduating in 1929. He goes on to study art and receives his bachelor's degree in fine arts, or BFA, from the University of Denver. Fraccassini then teaches at his alma mater, the University of Denver, for 8 years before entering the armed services during World War II. Then he is stationed at Fort Logan Reception Center in Denver. Much like those students who flocked to Iowa Wesleyan after World War II, so too came Professor Fraccassini. While teaching here at Iowa Wesleyan College from 1946 to 1956, Fraccassini continued his own education, receiving his MFA, or Master's of Fine Arts, from the University of Iowa in Iowa City in 1951. In 1956, after 10 years at Iowa Wesleyan, Fraccassini continued his career of teaching and being an independent artist in Iowa City for an additional 20 years. His art is housed in museum collections and private collections across the Midwest. He actually participated in over 30 solo art shows during his career, many here in Iowa. I love this picture. With an understanding of the institution's administration and faculty, we now look to the educational values and academic setup of Iowa Wesleyan at the time. By 1946, Iowa Wesleyan had functioned as an institution of higher education for over 100 years, We recently celebrated our Founders Day on February 17th, celebrating 179 years of existence, which I think is fantastic. The opening statement of the Associated Course Catalog read, "All are welcome, and all are treated with equal tolerance. Freedom of thought and speech for both faculty and students is guaranteed. But in every way possible, the Christ life and the Christ way are exalted." This kind of continual balance between academic freedom and religious or moral expectation based as a Methodist-based institution is further kind of outlined in the students' general regulations. So there were minimum regulations for students on campus in terms of their academic and social life. The course catalog actually points to student organizations kind of being the epicenter of creating further expectations for students. So there were only 4 specific regulations listed, 3 of which I'll share with you. First, students must attend all classes. Perfect. As well as the weekly chapel and assembly. Second, female students not living in their own home or working for room and board at an approved home are required to live in the college dormitories. Now, if you joined us last March, which seems like decades ago, you'll note that this rule has actually been in place since the 1870s and has not changed up until 1940s. Third, which I always find humorous, the college discourages, for economic and hygienic reasons, the use of tobacco by any persons of college age. Very practical. At the time, the average cost for 2 semesters or 1 full curriculum year of instruction was $782. So this included your room, your board, your tuition, and your textbooks. This would be about $8,500 in today's kind of currency conversion. What I found so interesting is, we benchmark this 1946 date and say, okay, the modern art department started in 1946, but I knew it had to come from somewhere. So what was that kind of antithesis on campus that pushed it into the academic curriculum as a full educational department? The modern Iowa Wesleyan Art Department actually grew from a common for the 1940s, yet outdated today department, home economics. Within the Department of Home Economics at Iowa Wesleyan, students had the opportunity to take courses in sewing, cooking, home management, and original costume design, which I thought sounded fantastic. The real, reasoning behind the home economics department was practical life skills. And so that's kind of where we see students, the original costume design course, for example, had students mastering belt braiding, fabric design, sketching, and sewing fine seams. So this is where our art department comes from. In 1945, the year before Professor Braccassini was hired, several art courses were added as temporary to the home economics curriculum. The 1945-1946 college catalog affirms this, saying, "The college sees the addition of several new art courses, which promise to be firm foundations on which Iowa Wesleyan can build a fine art department." So we find ourselves back at this initial photograph of students completing coursework for, presumably, Professor Carl Fraccassini on the lawn of their departmental building, the Harlan-Lincoln House. So what did this program look like? In 1948, a college-wide rearrangement of the academic curriculum occurred. Iowa Wesleyan departments were actually grouped into 4 primary divisions, with art falling into the Division of Humanities. Other departments in the Division of Humanities were art, English, foreign language, music, religion and philosophy, and then speech, radio, and drama altogether. All degree-seeking students in the Division of Humanities actually had to take an art class to graduate, which I thought was fantastic. The Croker Yearbook states, "These departments of the Division of Humanities bring students to an understanding of the cultural aspirations and creative achievements of man. It is also the aim of the Division of Humanities to give students these insights, critical standards, and aesthetic sensibilities which will enrich their lives for the future. Of the Division of Humanities, the department was designed to fulfill the cultural need of the expanding personality of the liberal arts student, to prepare primary and secondary teachers, and to meet the needs of those students who wished to pursue a professional career. A degree from the Department of Art required the completion of 120 credit hours, actually fairly similar to what our students do today. 30 to 40 of those credit hours had to be within the Department of Art. And then, of course, there were general education requirements. As with any student on campus, they had to complete courses in English, natural science, religion and philosophy, citizenship, of course, physical education. It always rears its head. Students in the first full year of the Modern Art Department had a wide range of courses to select from when kind of creating that 30 to 40 courses for graduation with a BA in art. There's a really great summary in the Croker Yearbook that aims to show really what the epicenter of ideals for the Department of Art and their coursework is. It's a bit long, so bear with me, but I tried to reduce it and narrow it down, and it just didn't read the same. So it writes, in Wesleyan art classes, students learn to adjust themselves, to the new dimension which has been created by technology and scientific achievement. He realizes that all people around the world from whom he was once isolated by time and space are now his close neighbors. His relationship to his environment is increasingly more complex and more exacting. Art helps the student to find his place in the chaotic society in which he lives by giving him an understanding of and appreciation for individuals and other cultures through their aesthetic experiences. The art student learns to organize on canvas and in clay the elements of his environment and his own reactions to them. The ability to think of all the world and its people as a complete interacting organism. It is essential in developing international mindedness and world citizenship. I think what resonated with me about that statement is how applicable it is to today, to 2021. You know, this was something that was written in the late 1940s, and really I find this idea of international mindedness and global citizen to be such an important point and really true to our core values still here at Iowa Wesleyan today, and also resonating with us day in and day out. So what courses could you take? The courses in the Iowa Wesleyan Art Department included art in elementary school, art through the ages, which I thought sounded fascinating, design 1 and 2, introduction to art, art of the American Indian, drawing and painting 1 and 2, sculpture, watercolor painting, advanced drawing, mechanical perspective, advertising design, and finally lettering, layout, and typography. All of these seemed pretty self-explanatory for me through their title, except for that mechanical perspective. So I kind of had to dig a little bit to see what that really entailed, and a kind of light bulb moment went off. So mechanical perspective was specifically geared towards those students who were interested in industrial design or interior design, so kind of mechanical and architectural drawing. So a lot of math, I'm sure. 2 years later, they add another course offering, engraving and etching, into the art curriculum, which kind of helped to round out that full offering. One of the really interesting things that we see both in newspaper clippings of the time and on-campus publications, specifically the Mount Pleasant News, the Gazette, are that annual student art exhibitions are occurring almost every semester. And the university withheld the right, as was listed in the campus bulletin, to save one piece of art from every single student from every single class they were in. They made that kind of blanket statement pretty clear at the beginning of the art department, which I think is fantastic. Of course, it said that these pieces selected for the institution to maintain were of exceptional ability. So there was a standard there. Speaking of exceptional ability, the art department, like many on campus, had an ability to recognize students who were kind of going above and beyond the academic sphere of their work in the art department by being part of an honorary fraternity. Kappa Phi was the oldest honorary fraternity based on academic success for art students. It was established in 1911 at the University of Kentucky. The purpose of the art fraternity, not only to recognize the students, but also to encourage them to promote the ideals of art and art appreciation in their campus and community. Membership in Kappa Phi was open to all art majors and minors who maintained a 2.0 GPA in their art classes. So January 1947, 15 to 18 Iowa Wesleyan students were initiated into Kappa Phi with Professor Fraccassini as the group sponsor. I say 15 to 18 to be pretty clear that there were several different lists of students that were released over the month leading up to their initiation, so we're just not exactly quite sure. So we have different kind of conflicting documents as our primary sources. At this moment, I have to admit something. As all research projects tend to do, I made an assumption and a mistake. So I made the assumption that this group of cohorts, this 15 to 18 students initiated into Kappa Phi in 1947, were Iowa Wesleyan's first inductees into Kappa Phi. I was wrong. I was sitting one blustery winter day in Newsom Archives, and I came across a document that had the date June 4th, 1927. And I almost flipped right past it. Well, I'm not interested in 1927. I'm interested in the 40s and the 50s. But I thought, it's in the art department file, I should read it. So it was a document entitled Third Planting of the Iris. The document provides some interesting information about a tradition I think we often don't know about here on campus today, but also kind of the activities of those handful of art students who were on campus seeking a degree outside of a formalized department in the 1920s. The paper on faded onion skin reads, in the summer of 1922, the Board of Trustees of Iowa Wesleyan met and selected the iris as the official flower of the college. The white standards of the iris represent the truth and ideal womanhood of Wesleyan's women. The purple stands for the path leading to the very heart of the flower is the path of knowledge, which is consistently enriching the lives of our students. It is also appropriate that the art club sponsor the planting ceremony for the iris annually, which blooms in all rainbow colors and may be likened to a huge palette containing the art students' pastel watercolors. Further documentation unearthed that the Iota chapter of Kappa Phi, the honorary art fraternity, was established at Iowa Wesleyan in 1928. So we can think of our cohort of students in 1947 not as the first, but rather as the reactivation of this historic honorary art fraternity at Wesleyan. With an understanding of the establishment of the art program, its instructional philosophy, faculty, and students, we now move to the physical use of the Harlan-Lincoln House as an academic department. There is a wealth of fantastic interior photographs from the 1946 to 1959 time period, which are preserved on campus and in annual publications. I think we're exceedingly lucky as a museum to be tied to an institution of higher education because that time period before the museum was established was being archived and documented throughout history. Not all museums or historic buildings are that lucky, but we are. So I'm excited to share those with you today. Before moving to the Harlan-Lincoln House, the art department was in residence in the fall of 1946 in the old physics building, or some of you may know it as the German College building on the 3rd floor. Today it is between the kind of open area with the marker between the Adam Trachman Hall of Sciences and the Nemitz Suites. When the Harlan-Lincoln House became the art department, the academic department actually only used the main floor of the museum, the first floor of the museum. The second floor was an apartment for faculty and staff and their family including Professor Fracassini's family. Some of you might not know that this space, even after the museum was established in 1959, maintains its presence as a residential facility for faculty and staff up to the 1990s, which I think is much more recent than many of us think. So let's explore. Let's explore the Harlan-Lincoln House, comparing the interior today to the art space of the 1940s and 50s. And I'll toggle back and forth so you can see the comparisons. So first, we have our East Room. If you walk into the Harlan-Lincoln House, it is to your right. We call it the parlor. This is the space we bring them to talk about the social lives of the Harlans in the 1800s, as well as the political career of Senator Harlan. You see a lovely section of furnishings from the museum's collection, and of course our iconic bay windows. So here is that same area of the museum as the art studio. Again, we are very lucky to have the bay windows because they make pinpointing the orientation of photographs really easily accessible. You can see both functioning space for art and easels. What I imagine is possibly a table full of objects for still life studies. And then, of course, not museum standard today, but piles of artwork across the floor. So again, you have, today is a parlor, which has looked like this since about 2007, to the art studio. Now, turning north in the room, looking towards the north, today we have some wonderful oil on canvas paintings on the north wall of the museum. Specifically an oil-on-canvas portrait of Senator Harlan, and two paintings that we attribute to his daughter, Mary Harlan-Lincoln. I think it's ironic that these paintings are on display here, because this was actually the painting storage and display area for that room. So we can slowly toggle. So you can see slotted storage for canvases, and then drawered or flat files for drawings, non-framed canvases, those types of things. So again, and then today. Again, very thankful for those bay windows, which help us identify exactly where things are located. So that was the East Room. If you were to walk into the West Room of the museum today, this is what you'd see. And this is pointing southeast. So today, we use the East Room, or what was the Senator Harlan, to display and discuss with visitors a lot of our really specific Harlan-Lincoln family pieces. So in this room, this is where the fragment of the textile that President Lincoln was wearing the night of the assassination lives. This is where two mourning veils, one from Mary Harlan-Lincoln, one from Mary Todd Lincoln, are framed. This is also where we talk about the Harlan and Lincoln descendants, so the three grandchildren of President Lincoln and Senator James Harlan. For the art department, this was another classroom space as well as a display space. They used this east wall, which is now covered by our wonderful broadside piece. What they did, and what many of the primary source documentations talked about, was a critique wall, which automatically makes me nervous, like I'm turning a class project in the next day. And so they would not only use the wall to display pieces that were part of the curriculum for the day, but then when finished works were completed, they would place them on the wall for critique. Here's a great example of Professor Fracassini and his art students in 1950, again along the same wall in the Harlan-Lincoln House. Again, it's architectural features which help us kind of identify and pinpoint where we are in the home. This transom window and some of the moldings along the baseboards always help me kind of identify where in the space we are, particularly with a closer perspective to the piece. Now, we've seen two beautiful, full of light spaces for art students to work and engage in their academic curriculum. It's that inspiring setting that the Croker yearbook first talked about when the department moved into the Harlan-Lincoln House. But more space was to come, not going up, but going down. An article in the June 7th, 1950 Mount Pleasant News reads, Preliminary work is being done for improvement of the Harlan House near the college campus and owned by Iowa Wesleyan. The basement is to be excavated. The house is to be raised 10 inches and a new foundation is to be placed. How many of you knew there was a basement at the Harlan-Lincoln House or have been down there? I wouldn't recommend it. This non-historic space, unbelievably enough, becomes a third instructional space for the art department. Lovely pictures. Accessed by an open-backed wooden staircase, which I think is the most scary thing as a child I remember of living in a historic home. This is one large rectangular room. There is a small alcove to the west that sits under Senator Harlan's office on the 3rd floor, but there's not much space in there with the boiler. And cinder block walls and concrete foundation. So today you can see it's empty. We do not use the basement space for anything besides some storage of patio furniture or doors from inside the home that are non-historic. But 70 years ago, envision it transformed into an artwork space. Very interesting. Drafting tables, easels, storage units are visible throughout the space. I just think about, I mean, I am not very tall, I'm 5'4", and I still kind of find myself leaning around the rafters. I had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Carol Nemitz about the art department's time at the Harlan-Lincoln House because Dr. Nemitz, Iowa Wesleyan alum and special assistant to the president, actually was a student who took an art class in the basement of the Harlan-Lincoln House. She said she had the pleasure, with kind of air quotes, to take an art class in the basement of the Harlan-Lincoln House. She remembers it as dingy, not great, especially as compared to those studio spaces on the 1st floor of the museum. I do have to say, as Carol often does, she had a wonderful story to tell me that spoke a little bit to Professor Fracassini as well. She says she remembers one of the assignments in her drawing class was to draw a duck or a swan. She couldn't remember which. She said it was some waterfowl. And she said she remembered it wasn't going well, and Fracassini openly concurred in front of the class that it wasn't going well for her. And as someone who I have seen as, a longstanding staff and faculty member, as special assistant to the president, to hear her say this following line, I think I laughed out loud. She said, "I think I had someone else finish it for me. I got a C in the class." Throughout my research, I did uncover numerous other pictures of students working in art spaces in this 1940s and 1950s time period. But unfortunately, because of the lack of external perspective of the room or the space, I couldn't quite guarantee where or if they were positioned in the Harlan-Lincoln House. So I do want to share those with you with that caveat that with more information or potential captions in the future that are uncovered, we might discover that these are other places across campus. So we have another basement photograph. Again, very similar to our lighting that we have in the museum basement today. You can see drying racks on the far right side. And then from the 1949 and 1951 yearbooks. The 1951 yearbook was really fascinating for me because they went through and did all the detailed work for caption and identification of every single student in every single picture. And so as a historian, I thank the class of 1951 for that. One of the really interesting things that I discovered throughout the research, we talked about, and I was looking at Professor Fracassini as the head of the art department, but what I really found was kind of his influence on other things, including this documentation, this Croker yearbook that I had been using day in and day out to gather my information. The credits from the 1950 Croker yearbook read, "We could not conclude our book without a word of thanks and gratefulness for those who have aided us, especially the Croker advisor, S. Carl Fracassini, who gave the yearbook much of his time and talents. Similar sentiments like this are shared year after year up until 1956. Another example reads, "The staff extends its gratitude to those who devoted time and effort in identification, typing, and proofreading, and to Carl Fracassini, faculty advisor whose early advice and criticism directed our attention toward thoughtful planning and better organization of the material. So again, another little insight. In 1956, Professor Fracassini transitioned to instruction at the University of Iowa. His assistant professor, Albert Wayne, took lead of the art department. It was really interesting to see that Albert, or Al, was a fellow Colorado native who actually earned his bachelor's degree at the University of Denver and followed his mentor, Professor Fracassini, to Iowa Wesleyan. After 13 years of residency at the Harlan-Lincoln House, the next era of the building began. As we did before, we start at the top. Several images of the Kroger staff, which I think are fantastic. So you can see versions of the publication as well as what I assume is a staged proofreading session. John Raymond Chadwick took over the presidency of Iowa Wesleyan from Niles. He was born in Ohio, received his bachelor's degree from Ohio Wesleyan University in 1920. After graduating, Chadwick served as the Methodist Church in Massachusetts and Minnesota, receiving his PhD from Boston University. He was a minister in Appleton, Wisconsin at the time of his election as president of Iowa Wesleyan, being installed on January 1st, 1950. In January 1960, a decade later, President Chadwick released his President's Report for the decade. It was published in our alumni newsletter, The Purple and White, and there was a really interesting section that talked about this transition of the art department from the Harlan-Lincoln House to 503 Broad Street. So it's the last college property, the White House right along the train tracks here on the west track of campus. And he wrote, "Naturally, shortly after coming to campus, I began to dream of restoring the Harlan House to the condition which it held when occupied by Senator Harlan. But adverse circumstances in connection with the Korean War made this an impossibility. In February 1959, however, we took our first step forward by the creation of the Harlan House Restoration Committee and the employment of an executive director. An Iowa Wesleyan alum of January 1959, Larry Bellis, was hired as the Harlan Restoration Executive Director. Chadwick said, he had an interest in history and antiques since childhood. When Larry started at Iowa Wesleyan, he became especially interested in the Harlan-Lincoln tradition at the college and was determined to know more about the subject. In just about 35 to 40 minutes, we have transformed one singular black and white image and one singular sentence on a museum tour into a more holistic understanding of this critical time period of the Harlan-Lincoln House, that 1946 to 1959 time period. I'll now have to change my scientific analysis, answering the question, how long do tours take, to 30 to 2 hours and 35 minutes, depending on your availability, and hopefully someone will take us up on that offer. I do want to leave time for questions and also for individuals to share their thoughts, whether it's an experience or a reminiscence they had about the Harlan-Lincoln House as used as the art department, or their kind of general experience on campus during this time or interaction with Professor Fracassini or the family. But I do have one more photo to share. Now, if you ever took me up on that 2-hour tour, I guarantee you this is something you saw. The longer people tend to stay in the museum, kind of the deeper our tours go and the more obscure. It is very difficult to take a picture of this, and so I will actually be PDFing the whole presentation and then JPEGing this image and sending it to everyone with the email address you provided on your reservation. But if you can see, this is the west room of the museum. So you come in our front door and you take a left. Etched into the historic glass of the museum is the signature S.C. Fracassini. I don't remember, it might have been Liz, it may have been Paul, I don't know who pointed this out to me, but I remember my first week in the museum just cursing know that this is a historic property. Well, it wasn't. It was a functional workspace for students. It was a home residence for faculty and staff members. When we think of the museum today, it's so different than how we thought about the structure 70, 100, 150 years ago. It's still a functioning space, but as Liz pointed it out, in a myriad of different functionalities. I can't guarantee that Professor Fracassini was the individual who signed his name. Perhaps it was a delinquent student, perhaps it was one of his children, but it is there. And I think it provides us now with a deeper understanding of him and the art department at the time. In kind of a metaphor of such, it is him looking back in at the history of the house and its use as the art department, but also as a window to the future and looking out as campus as it continues to evolve and develop beyond its 179-year history, as it will continue to do so with us and as it will continue to do so long after us. So I encourage you to come and tour the museum, to see all of the spaces that you've seen today as they are now at the museum, and of course to run your finger across the historic glass in Professor Carl Fracassini. So thank you. Okay. We have plenty of time for questions. Yes, Paul.
Does the university own any of Professor Fracassini's paintings?
The question was, does the university own any of Professor Fracassini's paintings? Yes. I believe 2 are on display, 1 or 2 are on display on the second floor of Chadwick Library, if you head to the Belmont Mansfield room. And then I do know that I think there are a few more in the collection. He also is documented really heavily at the University of Denver and at the Denver Art Museum, particularly because that was kind of his home base during his initial work. I also know that the State Historical Society in Iowa City and the University of Iowa archives do have faculty listings of Professor Fracassini. Unfortunately, right now the archives are closed with continued COVID protocols, and I just would not have had enough time anyway. Then you would be here for the full 2 hours of the museum tour. But I believe the painting you saw, I believe, is the one that's up. Yes?
I'm Jared Hill from Cedar Rapids, but I grew up right across the street behind the park.
Oh my gosh.
There. I knew the Fracassini family very well.
Mm-hmm.
Wife Carol and son Davey.
Son Davey. Yeah. I won't share a name because I didn't ask if it was okay to share this story. But there's a Mount Pleasant resident who remembers the Fracassini son being quite handsome and attractive looking, and that as they would walk past the house after school, they would always kind of keep an eye out to see if he was out on the front porch, and they would kind of alter their route home to walk past the Harlan-Lincoln House if he was on the porch, which I think just makes me so happy. It reminds me of that scene from Meet Me in St. Louis where the neighbor is on the front porch and they kind of casually walk out to just take in the sun. But I think that is a whole other research arm that I think is so interesting, is the individuals, the faculty and staff who lived and really just lived their lives on the second floor of the museum, hosting dinners, hosting parties, doing homework, kind of all of these things that we think of day-to-day tasks, and the neighbors who experienced that home like you did as a friend's house or a colleague's house, before that and after that time. So thank you for sharing. Yeah, Liz.
Jared, I might ask you, were the Fracassinis involved in the community? Were they participants in Mount Pleasant life, or were they strictly on campus?
No, I think I can't say anything they were involved in, but they were certainly at college.
So the question was if the Fracassini family, particularly the 2 our attendees here, were active in the Mount Pleasant community. The conversation or the answer was yes. And I do remember seeing a few different newspaper articles, particularly in the Mount Pleasant News, about community art classes that were hosted by Professor Fracassini and his wife, and both for the adult level and the, I would say K-12 or K-6 education. So those So if you can envision that kind of west room with the critique wall, that was a space for the community to gather to also learn and celebrate art, which I think was really fantastic. So,
I took one of those classes.
You did?
When I was a kid, probably
Yeah.
8 years old.
8-year-old class, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you draw a duck or a swan?
Well, I didn't fit the old German building.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Claudia?
I was a guest at the Fracassini's apartment, and I had always lived in a house, and everybody I knew lived in a house, and so to go to an apartment was really a special thing. And Mrs. Fracassini was my 8th grade teacher at Pleasant Lawn School, and so she invited us to come. And one of the things I remember is that the art department had paint spilled on the floor. And I didn't know anything about art departments or anything, but at our house, we took very good care of the floor, and you wouldn't have spilled anything on them. And here was the art department with nice floor, but splotches of paint here and there.
So Claudia shared that there, while visiting the Fracassinis, there were art splatters on the historic floors, which I can tell you some are still present today. I used to, again, like the etched name in the glass, find it just appalling that there would be art on the floors, but I think over time and seeing the museum as a more holistic building that reflects all of its past, you know, I would almost hate to sand those out when restoring the floors and lose just that tiny hint of the art department, particularly because so much has been changed over time. And I think that's a long-standing preservation question that a lot of museums and historic houses have to contend with is how much do we change, how much do we restore, and if we restore everything, at what point is it no longer the house and it's just an iteration of what those individuals experienced. So that's a deep philosophy question for historic restorations that I don't think anyone knows the best answer for. But yes, Jared.
I watched them do that excavation, and Carol was always concerned when they had that house checked up. She was always worried that some of their workers would be looking up into their apartment through knotholes.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, you think about it, it was an active space and residence when they were excavating the basement. And I mean, it's held up really well. I think there are fraternity letters painted in the basement floor and lots of signatures of students. So I know that it was a space that people were in frequently. I also have a list, a document of things, I call it random things people say on tours that may further lead to additional research. And I've had a lot of fraternity brothers and sisters remember meetings or spaces in the basement after the museum was established. And so that's something of interest to me. My favorite comment on that was someone thought it was during the Fracassini's time period, but I was not able to pinpoint it. They thought that the professor living upstairs, is how they phrased it, had a bobcat as a pet. And I had a bobcat. And I just kind of stopped, and it was on a tour for the Mount Pleasant High School class in 1959. And by gosh, I hope to one day know what the part of that story is, but I think that's kind of the wonderful thing about having so many different faculty and staff members living in the home, is it's those stories that come out and kind of make you stop and think, huh, I wonder. But I did not find a picture of the Fracassinis with a bobcat, and I kind of hope never to. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Take a quick comment. I remember in the late 50s, I guess it was, early 60s, a drunk came driving down Main Street and missed the curb, hit that bay window, took that whole bay window off.
Yeah.
And he was stopped out in front of my folks' house.
Oh my God.
But it was hanging on the hood, he couldn't get it off. He keep going forward and back, trying to shake it off. Couldn't get it off. They had to call the police, and
Yeah.
they came out and got the guy.
Yeah, so what Jared is referencing, who, if you've never been to Mount Pleasant, Main Street kind of not ends, but physically stops at the Harlan-Lincoln House, and you have to take a right on Broad to kind of go around and catch back up. And so if you are just going straight, you will run right museum, which thankfully he did not do. But I'm thinking 1973, but I don't think that sounds right. But he somehow missed the stop sign and the tree in the front yard, and then swerved back and took out this entire bay window. There's actually pictures of it from outside where you can see the corner of the red couch sticking out of the hole. And again, probably a miracle that he didn't go right through the front of the museum because our porch wasn't there at that time, so you would have just driven straight into the hallway. But that is also something that people often tell me is they remember when the drunk driver hit the museum.
He did damage that famous chair, chair.
He did not.
No,
Oh, did he? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and my dad repaired it and recleaned it.
The chair he is talking about. It's just in the corner now. We keep it well away from the windows now. This is the reclining chair. If you don't know the story, Senator James Harlan does have one patent in the U.S. Patent Office, and it's for this chair. This is the only one we know of in existence. And it's not patented for its reclining technology. It's actually completely collapsible. So the foot panel slides underneath. You see this iron bar. It pulls out, and the seat falls to two bumpers. And then there's two butterfly hinges along the back. And as the front folds forward, the arms kind of locomote and store to the side. Oftentimes when I'm talking to students about this, I express frustration because we don't really know all of the reasoning why he would design something like this, and it's kind of been lost to history. We can make our best inferences, but I find that a really fascinating piece. And lots of people remember this because it has been on display at things like Old Threshers, around the community, and all of that throughout the years of the museum. So that's the piece. Yes?
Actually, I guess I have a question. I was wondering if the drunk driver was a Fidel. I don't know. The stories abound.
I know there are some Fidels watching, so the comment was the drunk driver a Fidel? I don't know. I'm sure we could find out, but I'm sure they wouldn't want us to know, sadly, 50 years later. But that was a perfect comment. So, any other questions? Okay. I will have Liz come up, and I'll be here to answer any questions that you might have. Again, I think it's just fascinating that we can turn, 13 years, and it just makes you wonder what else is out there from that tea room or that Greek campus time period as well. So, Liz. Thank you very much, Anna. Your presentations are always so well researched and so interestingly presented. We all learn so much, and it makes it come alive again. All the stories through our many years on this campus, and it just endears Wesleyan to us even more all the time. We certainly thank you. We appreciate you, and this type of presentation that you are so willing to offer us is just an example of your caring and your love for the Harlan-Lincoln House, for which we are indeed very grateful. Thank you. Upcoming next week, we get to come back together again. Again, so exciting that our series is continuing this March. And we look forward to Pat White, March 8th, Tuesday. Pat White, our local historian, who again is an excellent sleuther and presenter about what's going on locally. And her context is going to do some dot connecting, some connecting of relationships. And after all, isn't that the foundation of what makes history so interesting, are the relationships amongst us. She's going to be telling us about historic Mount Pleasant and that Greencastle, Indiana connection. I know that you are going to be intrigued to find out all the dots, all the connections coming to this area
that as well. And all the same protocols apply. In this room, socially distanced with your mask and your check-in at the front window. Again, we will welcome our virtual attendees, and we look forward to seeing everyone again next week. Thank you for coming. I'm sure Anna will answer any more questions. Or probably the Hills as well.
Yeah.
It's been so nice to have Jared and Carol with us today.
Claudia and I were classmates over there at Bellis.